She didn't forget me. She chose to leave me behind, and there's a difference that I spent years trying to explain to people who couldn't understand why that distinction mattered so much to me. I was 26 when it happened. Not a child, technically, but I was still her daughter, and I still trusted her the way you trust someone who has known you your whole life. That kind of trust doesn't come with an age limit. It just lives in you until the day it doesn't anymore. My sister's name is Vivian. She's 4 years older than me, and she has always been the one my parents pointed to when they wanted to show the world they'd done something right. Good job, good husband, good address in Oakville. She wore her life like a credential. And me? I was the one who took longer to figure things out, who switched careers at 24, who didn't own property, who still called my mom on Sunday nights just to hear a familiar voice. I wasn't a failure, I just hadn't arrived yet. At least that's what I told myself. The trip was my mother's idea. She'd wanted to take us both somewhere special. A sister's trip, she called it, except she was coming too, which made it more of a mother-daughter's trip, which was fine. More than fine. I was excited. We were going to Portugal, Lisbon, then a few days in the Algarve. My mom had been talking about this trip for 2 years. She'd bookmarked hotels, printed out restaurant lists, bought a new travel wallet with a European adapter already tucked inside. This was her thing. She loved planning. What I didn't know, what I wouldn't understand until I was standing alone in the international terminal at Pearson with no phone, no boarding pass, and no idea where my family had gone, was that Vivian had already been working on my mother for months, quietly, the way she did everything. She never raised her voice, she never made scenes, she just talked, softly, consistently, into my mother's ear until my mother started hearing Vivian's thoughts as her own. The lie she told was specific and cruel. I'll get to that. We drove to the airport together. My mom rode in the front seat of Vivian's SUV, and I sat in the back with the luggage pushed against my knees, which should have felt normal because it was a long drive and we'd packed heavy, but something about it bothered me. A small thing. I told myself I was being too sensitive. I had a habit back then of diagnosing my own feelings before I let myself feel them. Too anxious, too needy, too much. I was always editing myself down to something more manageable. Check-in was fine, security was fine. We grabbed coffee at one of the terminal shops and sat at a table near our gate, and I remember feeling genuinely happy. Relieved, almost, like the trip was already working. My mom was laughing at something Vivian said, and the sun was coming through the terminal windows, and I thought, this is good. We needed this. Then Vivian said she was going to the bathroom and asked me to watch her bag. My mother said she'd go too, and she handed me her boarding pass along with Vivian's, said she didn't want to lose it in her pocket. I held them. Both boarding passes plus mine. I sat at that table with 3 boarding passes and 2 carry-ons that weren't mine and a half-finished latte going cold. They didn't come back. I waited 15 minutes before I started to feel it, that specific kind of dread that starts in your stomach and climbs. I went to the women's bathroom nearest our gate. Empty. I tried the one farther down to the terminal. Also empty. I went back to the table. Their bags were still there, which made no sense if they'd gone through to the gate without me. So they were still here. They had to be. Except they weren't. I found out later what happened, but in that moment, all I had was the slow, terrible realization that our flight had been called, and then called again, and that I had been sitting at that table for 40 minutes, holding 3 boarding passes, waiting for 2 people who were already gone. The gate agent told me, very carefully, that 2 passengers matching my family's description had boarded early. Medical pre-boarding. Someone had requested it on their behalf. A wheelchair for my mother, citing a mobility issue, which got them past the main boarding queue and onto the plane well before general seating. My mother does not have a mobility issue. She hiked the grouse grind to summer before without stopping. By the time I processed what the gate agent was telling me, the door was closed. The plane was gone, and I was standing in a busy terminal at Toronto Pearson with my own passport and boarding pass and nothing else. Because my phone had been in Vivian's bag, I'd put it there when we went through security because my jacket didn't have pockets and I hadn't thought twice about it. And Vivian's bag was gone. I want you to understand what that moment felt like, not the dramatic version of it, where everything goes slow and cinematic. The actual version, which is that your brain does a very strange thing where it keeps trying to find the rational explanation. There must be a misunderstanding. They must be at another gate. They must have tried to reach me and couldn't. You cycle through every possible innocent version of events because the alternative, that your mother got on a plane and left you, is something your mind won't land on right away. It takes a minute. It takes standing very still in the middle of a busy airport and letting the noise happen around you and realizing that no one is coming. I asked a woman near the gate if I could borrow her phone. She handed it over without a word, which I still think about sometimes, just a stranger who saw something in my face and didn't ask questions. I called my mom's cell. It went straight to voicemail. I called Vivian's. Same. I stood there holding a stranger's phone and left 2 voicemails that I don't fully remember, except I kept my voice very even because I didn't want to cry in front of anyone, which, looking back, is such a strange thing to prioritize. An airline customer service agent named, I'll call him by his role because I only knew him by his name tag. He came over and asked if I needed help. I told him what happened. I watched his face do the thing that faces do when someone tells you something that sounds impossible but is clearly true. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Let me make some calls." He made me sit down. He brought me water. He called his supervisors. There was a conversation I wasn't entirely part of, happening a few feet away in lowered voices. He came back and asked me a few questions. Had I checked in with my family? Yes. Did I have photo ID? Yes, my passport, it was in my own bag. Was there anyone else I could contact? I gave him my dad's number, my dad who was at home in Burlington and had no idea any of this was happening. My dad picked up on the second ring. I told him what I knew. There was a silence on his end that was very loud. Then he said, "I'll call your sister right now." And his voice had something in it I hadn't heard before. Something flat and careful, like he was keeping himself very controlled. He called back 12 minutes later. He told me what Vivian had told our mother. She'd said that I had been sending threatening messages to her husband, that I'd been harassing her family for months, that I had shown up at her house twice without being invited and had frightened her children, that she was afraid of me and didn't feel safe on the trip, and had only agreed to go because she thought she could manage it, but that at the airport she'd finally told our mother everything, and our mother had agreed that it wasn't safe for me to be there. None of it was true. Not a single word. Vivian's husband and I had barely spoken in 3 years. I'd had dinner at their house twice in the past 18 months, and both times were family gatherings I'd been invited to. I had never sent him a threatening message. I had never showed up uninvited. I had never frightened her children, who are 7 and 4 years old and who I genuinely adore and who had, the last time I saw them, asked me to play Uno for 45 minutes straight. But my mother believed her. She got on a plane and left me in an international terminal because my sister told her I was dangerous, and she believed her. That's the part that kept coming back to me, over and over in the hours after. Not just what Vivian did, what my mother decided to do. The airline staff were extraordinary. I want to say that clearly because I think sometimes those people don't get credit for what they manage in impossible situations. They helped me contact the passenger assistance team. They flagged my situation to their duty manager. They helped me reach the Canadian Air Transport Security Authority to understand my options. At no point did anyone leave me standing alone, which is more than I can say for the people who were supposed to love me. At some point, and I don't know exactly when, because I still had no phone, a woman came and sat beside me. She introduced herself and said she worked with a passenger advocacy office attached to the airport. She had a calm, direct way of talking that made me feel like the situation was manageable, even when I wasn't sure it was. She asked me to tell her everything from the beginning. I told her. She listened without interrupting. When I was done, she said, I need you to understand that what you're describing, if accurate, constitutes abandonment of an adult family member, and depending on the circumstances, it may constitute fraud. Pre-boarding is a protected accommodation. Falsely claiming a medical condition to access it is not a small thing. I hadn't thought of it in those terms yet. I was still stuck in the part of the story where my mother had left me. I was still The woman, I'll call her the advocate, made some calls. Vivian and my mother had connected through the flight, which had a layover in Frankfurt. The advocate explained that the situation had been flagged and that both passengers were now aware the circumstances were under review. She told me that a formal report had been filed with Pearson regarding the pre-boarding claim, and then she said something I wasn't expecting. She said, "Your sister's story has some inconsistencies. We were able to look at the pre-boarding request. The notation in the system says the wheelchair was requested for a senior with limited mobility," that specific language. "The request was made by another passenger on the same booking." She looked at me. "Your sister made the request, not your mother." The picture came together in a way that made my stomach drop. Vivian had planned this. She'd requested the pre-boarding. She'd told my mother the story, whatever version she told her, however she packaged it, at the airport, close enough to departure that my mother wouldn't have time to think. She'd moved them through security before I could interfere. She'd taken my phone, and she'd left me there. Why? I've thought about this for a long time. I think it comes down to money in the way most things in my family eventually do. My grandmother, my mom's mom, had passed away 8 months earlier and left a portion of her estate to be split between me and Vivian equally. It wasn't a fortune. It was enough. Enough that Vivian, who had always been the one my grandmother was harder on, who had always felt like she deserved more of my grandmother's approval than she got, had decided that equal wasn't acceptable. She had been contesting the will with a lawyer for months. I hadn't taken it seriously. I'd told my own lawyer it would sort itself out. I think Vivian wanted to damage me in my mother's eyes badly enough that my mother would support the contest. I think she wanted my mother on her side, in writing if possible, and she chose to do it in the cruelest and most dramatic way she could find, because that's how Vivian operates when she feels like she's losing. She escalates. She makes it a crisis. She makes you the problem. My dad drove to the airport. It took him just over an hour with traffic on the 403. He walked through the arrivals area looking for me, and when he found me, I was in a small room near this customer service center, drinking my 3rd cup of water. He sat down and put his arm around me and didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said, "I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I'm so sorry this happened." That was when I cried. Finally, in an airport room with fluorescent lights and a stack of printed incident forms on the table, my dad's arm around me, I let it go. The formal complaint process was something my dad helped me navigate over the following days. The pre-boarding fraud was taken seriously by the airline. There are specific provisions in Canadian aviation policy, and I won't pretend I understood all of it at the time. I had to learn as I went, that protect accessible travel accommodations from being misused. The airline launched an internal review. The documentation Vivian had submitted in the pre-boarding request was flagged as potentially falsified. The estate lawyer got involved too, because the incident had been documented formally with witness statements, including the airline staff who had helped me. It created a record that was relevant to the will contest. My grandmother's lawyer argued that my sister's conduct demonstrated a pattern of deception. The judge agreed. The will was upheld. The split remained equal. Vivian was also required to complete a formal process with the airline that I don't have all the details of, but that I know involved a period of restricted travel privileges. I won't pretend that felt like justice exactly. It was something. It wasn't everything. My mother called me 3 days after she landed in Portugal. She said she was sorry. She said she hadn't known what to think. She said Vivian had been so convincing, so distressed, that she hadn't felt like she had a choice. I listened to all of it, and then I told her very carefully that choosing not to investigate whether your child's safety is at risk before leaving them alone in an international airport is still a choice. She started to cry. I didn't. We are still in contact. My mother and I, it's different now. There's a layer between us that I don't think will ever fully dissolve, a membrane of understanding that the person I thought she was and the person she proved herself to be under pressure are not exactly the same. I love her. I do. I just hold her a little differently now. Vivian and I have not spoken since. I used to wonder if I was being too rigid about that. If time would soften things, if I'd get to a point where I could separate what she did from who she was and find a way through. I stopped wondering about a year ago. Some things don't get better with distance, some things just become clearer. What I know now that I didn't know then is that the people who are supposed to protect you are also capable of abandoning you. Not always strangers, not always enemies. Sometimes it's the person sitting across from you at a coffee table in a terminal, laughing at something while the sun comes through the windows, while you're still thinking this is good, while you're still trusting. But I also this. Strangers held the door open. A woman handed me her phone without asking why. An airline employee sat with me for 3 hours and made sure I wasn't alone. A stranger's calm voice told me what was happening to me had a name, and that name meant something legally, and that I wasn't invisible. The world did not owe me that, and it showed up anyway. I'm not the same person I was in that terminal. I don't mean that in the way people say it when they want to sound transformed. I mean it practically. I check my own bag now. I keep my own phone. I don't hand things to people to hold, even people I've known my whole life. I pay attention to small things that bother me instead of diagnosing them away. And when I hear that quiet voice in my stomach that says something is wrong, I don't tell it to be quiet anymore. I listen.